Hey guys, welcome to the Week 10 edition of the Fantasy Points UFL Breakdown. I'm here with Millionaire Maker winner and one of the winningest spring football DFS players of all time, Neil Orfield. Neil, final week of the regular season. How you doing?
Yeah, excited to have a pretty big contest in the 333 this week. Was not expecting that in week 10. Kind of odd timing with, some motivation questions, but excited to have, high stakes back after a couple weeks without it, so I can lose a lot of money real quickly again. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm also doing good. I'm also excited to lose a lot of money very quickly again in high stakes, 10K to first in the 333, plus, of course, 5K to first in the $20. So some good, juicy tournaments this week. And like Neil said, timing is a little strange. We do have a bit of a unique slate this week, given the playoff situation and some of the questionable motivations. We will obviously discuss all that. But first, I wanted to note a great promo from fantasypoints.com. Neil, normally I talk about our UFL 2026 promo code that gets you 10% off. We've got a better promo now. If you cancel your existing PFF subscription and you show proof to our customer service team, you'll get 20% off any Fantasy Points subscription. This is huge. It's an incredible upgrade to go from PFF premium stats to the data suite, like really night and day in terms of the filters, just all the things you can do in the data suite. Runs laps around PFF. This is also, producer Tom just noted, our biggest discount all year, 20% off. So you get a chance to upgrade, huge upgrade, from PFF Premium Stats to the Fantasy Points Data Suite, and of course, all of our other great fantasy football analysis over at fantasypoints.com. You can even get the rest of season UFL product, get 20% off. Again, all you have to do is send proof that you canceled your PFF sub to our customer support team, and they will give you the discount code you need to save 20% on a fantasypoints.com subscription. Neil, I love this for a million different reasons. I could probably do an hour-long show about all the gripes I have with PFF, but just know that I think this is the best promo we'll run, maybe ever. I'm very excited about this. All right, before we get into these games, Neil, I did want to talk playoff scenarios because I'm sure some people listening to the show want to know, what's the deal? Who's clinched? Who's still fighting to get in? And everything like that. So DC, Orlando, and St. Louis have all clinched spots in the playoffs. The Louisville Kings and the Birmingham Stallions are fighting for the remaining spot, that fourth playoff spot. Again, no divisions this year, so it is just the top four teams. Louisville is in with a win, a Birmingham loss, or an Orlando Storm win over the DC Defenders. They just need one of those three things to happen. Birmingham needs a little bit more luck on their side. They're in with a win and a Kings loss and an Orlando Storm loss. So yeah, that is the current playoff situation. You can see the tweet on your screen from the league. Yeah, pretty straightforward there for the most part, really just Louisville and Birmingham battling it out. Neil, anything to add on the playoff situation before we get into these games?
Yeah, just a question, I guess. I actually don't know where the UFL championship is being played. Is there any benefit to the teams that have already clinched? Do they have anything that they're playing for as far as getting home field advantage, anything like that?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. The championship game is going to be in DC. Okay. So I believe Orlando is pretty much locked into a home game for their first round game. I read something on Twitter that the league might not be able to secure Orlando's normal home field for that game because of previous, I believe, World Cup commitment from the stadium. So we'll see sort of how that unfolds. I know we've had some strange situations like that in the past with some of these playoff teams. But yeah, St. Louis has said that they want home field advantage, at least in the first round. And I believe if they win, they will secure that. So Ricky Prohl has said that they will play starters. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then DC, their motivations are, I would say, a bit more unknown. So yeah, we can discuss that a little bit more later as well. But yeah, that is the current situation regarding home field. Alrighty, Neil, let's get into these games here. Slate kicks off Friday evening with the Dallas Renegades at the St. Louis BattleHawks. Neil, Dallas is a 4.5-point underdog. The total is 46.5. I think I'd like St. Louis in the points, given that, as I mentioned, head coach Ricky Prohl said they will be playing their starters in this one because they want home field advantage in round one. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't feel that strongly about it. Luis Perez has been like fine, but I don't think he's been like he hasn't really changed this offense to be that much better than it had been. But it's a nice matchup. Sure, I'll go with you with St. Louis. And
All right, love that. Starting on the Dallas side, Neil, Austin Reed is a guy who week after week I've been punting $20 lineups on Austin Reed, and it just really hasn't worked out. And Neil, unfortunately, this week I had to give Luke Lennon a bigger projection. I've got him for about 5 DK, Austin Reed for only about 13 right now. Luke Lennon actually came in on the last drive in week 9 to replace Austin Reed. Now, for what it's worth, Austin Reed did do the post-game media availability with Rick Neuheisel. He did the midweek media availability with Rick Neuheisel. That said, there was no additional information provided regarding the quarterback situation. So we really just sort of have this weaker Austin Reed projection. I would also expect if Luke Lennon does get extended action, the team would probably lean more into the run because he is a solid runner there. Neil, what do you think of Austin Reed on a week where he's only projected for 2% ownership? The matchup is pretty terrible. There's obviously these playing time concerns. It's a tough sell.
Yeah, the only thing I really like about him is the 2% ownership. Like that's right. You can play him and you'll play one lineup and you'll be above the field. I don't know that I will play any Austin Reed. I think I'm just gonna lean into the spots that I like better. We just haven't really seen it from him in a long time, and now he's got a tough matchup, and we've got concerns about the playing time, and all this leads me to probably not getting to Austin Reed this week.
Yeah, no, I think that is very reasonable. Also curious what you think of these wide receivers. One of the more interesting notes to me was that we are likely going to get an ownership discount on Tyler Vaughns. I mean, obviously this offense hasn't been quite what we hoped in the second half of the season, but Tyler Vaughns at 14, 15% ownership for a guy who could push for a 30% target share in a game where Dallas is going to trail. That's pretty interesting to me, especially with so much ownership concentrating on, a guy like Hakeem Butler, who's 500 more expensive. But, I think in my initial run of ownership, I had him for around 40% owned. So, that is an interesting pivot to me, getting from Butler to Vaughns. What do you think of something like that? Any other pass catchers interest you here?
Yeah, I think Vaughns is very much. I believe Vaughns also 8 in this matchup earlier in the year. I think this is the one where he went completely off, maybe even scored that touchdown within the last 2 minutes of the game, where we kind of thought they were not playing for anything at that point. I think that was against St. Louis. I remember only because I was kind of surprised because St. Louis, typically kind of known for being pretty good in coverage. And to me, it looked like there were several broken plays where they were just, Tyler Vaughns was looked great, looked unstoppable against them. So we've seen it from him against this team before. I think he's, talented enough. You can always make the bet on Tyler Vaughns. So yeah, I'm in on Tyler Vaughns. I don't know if I'm going to get anywhere else in these pass catchers for Dallas. But yeah, I think Vaughns very much in play.
Yeah, I honestly, the only other guy who really jumps out to me, who I do think I'll probably get to a little bit of on the main slate, Emmanuel Butler, 93% route share last week. Denzel Mims was a healthy scratch last week, so definitely want to keep an eye out for that. I think, Butler with no Denzel Mims is their only other outside wide receiver, so he should be out there for basically every snap. With Denzel Mims, though, you're probably only looking at about 65, 70% of routes, which, at a 5,600 price tag, I still think is viable. He's at a 0.19 targets per route run this year, which is pretty good. It's second on the team behind Tyler Vaughns. So yeah, I think Emmanuel Butler is a fine play. But yeah, I'm not really itching to get there. I don't think I'm going to get to any Drake Stoops or Greg Ward this week. But yeah, did think Emmanuel Butler was worth noting. No showdown here either, so we don't really need to get into any of these other guys. The running back situation, though, in Dallas is very interesting and I think very important for this slate overall, in part because Lorenzo Lingard is projecting as the best running back value of the slate this week. Last week, we saw Ellis Merriweather take 1 carry for 20 yards and then get hurt. Lorenzo Lingard then emerged with 83% of snaps, 70% of routes, 61% of backfield weighted opportunity, finished the game with 9.1 weighted opportunities, as you see on your screen right there. Neil, Lorenzo Lingard is cheap. And, I noted in my article, I thought it was particularly encouraging that the only other running back with him after Ellis Merriweather went down was Keegan Jones, who was recently signed, I believe, on May 20th. But he was sort of described, Keegan Jones was, by the coaching staff as a running back wide receiver hybrid. So you would have expected in a situation where Ellis Merriweather went down, Keegan Jones getting, a bit more involved in the pass game. And while he did finish with 3 targets, I mean, Lingard had 70% of routes, Jones had 26%. So there was still a pretty clear preference towards Lingard on passing downs. That was highly encouraging to me. And, either way, getting a guy who's, probably going to push for 70% of snaps at a, what is he? $5,200 price tag. That's going to be one of the better values that you see this week. So Neil, what do you think about Lingard? I have him projected for 30% ownership right now. I'm a little worried that number could come up as we head towards lock. What do you think?
At 30%, I think he's a fantastic play. I think he's going to be a strong play. I'm going to have a lot of Lingard, regardless of where the ownership comes in, because I just think he's a pretty great value here. And I think Keegan Jones at 4,000 also very playable. We've only got him at 2% ownership. I would imagine I'll have some exposure on the main slate. He hasn't really played much, so you can always extrapolate. Like, he didn't play much last week, but there's a chance that now he comes in. He was the running back 3. Like, he just probably wasn't really prepared to play a ton last week. Maybe with another week of practice, he's able to get on the field a little bit more than he did last week. And again, just 4,000. This is also like the most run funnel matchup you can imagine. Just looking at yards per carry over the past 4 weeks 6 through 9, 5 yards per carry, just 5.4 yards per pass attempt. Like, almost getting allowing as many yards per carry as per pass attempt is the St. Louis defense. So with it being such a run funnel, and then you get these kind of great values. Lingard obviously is the one that really stands out. He's one that I'll have a lot of. But Jones, just because it is such a strong matchup and he's only 4,000 and not getting much ownership, I think is also in play on the main slate.
Yeah, I could see myself pushing Lingard's ownership up to as high as maybe 40-45% for the $20, which is what we project for. Neil, in the 333, I mean, Lingard might be 65-70% owned. You think that's about right?
I think that's about right, and it's probably about where it should be. Like, I think you just kind of lean into the known quantities.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Moving over to the St. Louis side here, Neil, we've got Luis Perez in, what is overall a pretty compelling matchup. Dallas has allowed the most yards per attempt of any defense since week 5. They've also allowed 32 points per game over that stretch. This defense has really fallen apart compared to the first 2-3 weeks of the season. What do you think about Perez here? Because, my first run of ownership, things are really concentrating around 3 quarterbacks: Perez, Jack Plummer, and Jalen Morton. Of course, Plummer and Morton we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. But Perez at 24% does feel a bit high to me. There's also more quarterback rotation question marks than we would have than we've had in previous weeks. So, I think the ownership makes sense. It's just, a quarter of the field playing Luis Perez. I don't know. I'm not sure where I want to fall on that yet.
Yeah, and I think that's probably about right. I think you laid out the case. It's just, he's a spring king. We know that he can play spring football. He's been very good here. He's never been like extremely consistent. I feel like I think it's kind of similar. Like, I think of him similar in a way to Jordan Teamu, where it's like he'll start the season really slow, and then you just know he's going to come on at some point. And I think that could happen at any time for Luis Perez. Like you said, we're not really worried about the benching risk. I think we have very clear pass catching options that we like with Luis Perez, and we just don't have that many quarterbacks to choose from that we feel good about at all. So I think Luis Perez quarter of the field is totally fine to me. I think I'll probably be pretty close to that.
Okay, like that. Something that I wanted to note as we get into talking about these skill players is, like I noted, head coach Ricky Prohl said, we're going to play our guys. We want home field advantage and all that. We don't have like a long history of coach speak with him, but I do believe him for what it's worth. He did also note, though, that guys who are banged up, who might be able to play if it's a playoff week, will probably rest in week 10. So just keep an eye out for any potential surprise inactives. Like if one of these, one of their 3 running backs ends up being inactive, that wouldn't be a total shock. Maybe one of the starting receivers ends up inactive, not a total shock. So, just keep an eye out for that. I have everyone projected as if it's a normal week with everyone healthy, but you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, even if they're not on the injury report. And I don't believe there is anyone notable here on the injury report. Yeah, no offensive players listed except for a tackle. tackle. So just wanted to make everyone aware that in case we get some weird inactives, in the next 24 hours, it wouldn't be a total shock. When it comes to these wide receivers, Neil, Hakeem Butler, I think, really needs no introduction in that regard. An awesome player. I think he's going to be in the vast majority of Luis Perez lineups for good reason. I love that touchdown that he scored last week, where I did kind of think he pushed the defensive back and scored the touchdown, and the DB gave up on the play to complain about the offensive pass interference and then just let him fall into the end zone. I really like that. So we have Hakeem Butler, and then, after that, we've got this trio of players who are all out there for a good amount of snaps in Stephen McBride, Ja'Cour Pearson, Blake Jackson. I'm curious, sort of, Neil, in your Perez lineups, I imagine Butler's going to be in almost all of them. How are you sort of delineating between these other three guys who are potential stacking partners?
Yeah, Butler will, yes, be in almost all of them. McBride would be my second favorite. He's been earning targets quite a bit from Luis Perez. Luis Perez seems to really like Stephen McBride. Another 8 targets last week, running 86% of the routes. So I'd say he is my second favorite. Ja'Cour Pearson, not that far behind, not running as many routes, but the kind of primary slot receiver, 6 targets last week. I think those are the 3 favorites. Am I reading this right? I'm seeing Blake Jackson 40 slot snaps and Ja'Cour Pearson 30 last week. That doesn't seem to add up, right?
I believe no. Yeah, that does add up. It's slot snaps, not slot routes in that sheet.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Blake Jackson, I mean, still running over 90% of routes, has not been a target earner at all. But by my old metric of let's see, routes run per target. Remember that was my thing a couple years ago. If you keep me crushing from that, we should expect some regression. But at this point, it's been long enough that I'm not sure if the regression is coming for Blake Jackson. I'd say he is moderately playable. But then would I prefer Sal Cannella over Blake Jackson is a real question. I don't know what to expect from Sal Cannella. Like, is he going to take a big bump up? Because he's coming from a 9% route share, doesn't. He could bump up. He could triple that. He's still only running 27% of routes. Right. I don't really want to play it, but who knows? He has a long history with Luis Perez. I call him borderline playable because we don't have showdown. We don't have anything else we can play. I think you can play Sal Cannella. I don't think I would go overboard with it just because he is it wouldn't be a shock if he's a 0 in this game.
Yeah. So I did write up Sal Cannella. I thought, he's only 3K. And I think the argument for him on the main slate is at least somewhat interesting. And you're not going to see really any ownership here. We have him for 0.9% ownership. I think part of that is because there's a potentially great value in Aesop Winston, who we will talk about a little bit later in the show. Braylon Sanders is also a little bit interesting to me. So there are some other value options here. But, Cannella didn't even get a full week of practice in last week. So this would be his first full week of practice. And, you would kind of think with a playoff spot already secured, St. Louis might want to experiment with getting him out there a little bit more. I mean, he's clearly better than James Bostic. The problem is that there's no world where Sal Cannella runs 60% or 70% of the routes this week, because even Tyler Neville was only running 35 to 45% of the routes. So that's probably what I would expect from Cannella on the high end. But at 3K, if he catches a touchdown, you're looking pretty good there, and they might try to focus on him in the red zone, especially because Hakeem Butler gets so much attention there. So I do like Cannella. I think in some $20 lineups, I'll have him paired with Perez there. Moving on to the backfield, I thought last week was a little bit interesting. While St. Louis did keep all 3 running backs active in Jarvion Howard, Kylan James, and Kevon Latulis, usage really concentrated around Howard and James. Howard had 52% of backfield weighted opportunity. James had 46%. Howard at 41% of snaps. James at 29%. Latulis came in at just 10% of snaps and 12% of routes. Neil, it does seem like they've been giving Kylan James a bit of a preference at the goal line, which does make me a bit nervous about my Jarvion Howard projection. I have him for about 12.5 DK, and part of me worries that if he's only getting, the ball in between the 20s, it's going to be hard for a huge game, a real slate breaker from Jarvion Howard. So I'm a little unsure about, him relative to his median, at least in tournaments. What do you think of the backfield here?
Yeah, I think Kylan James is the better play for tournaments. He's $400 cheaper getting those goal line, and he's 1/3 of the ownership. And the weighted opportunity is not that different between the two of them.
Yeah.
I don't have. It's not like a really strong preference. Just like I feel like they're similar plays, and Kylan James is 1/3 of the ownership and a little bit cheaper. So slight preference for Kylan James if I have to play one of them. I think they're both playable. I don't know that I'll get to the 21% that we have projected for Jarvion Howard right now. I would guess I come in a bit under the field there. It's a fine matchup. I mean, Dallas is allowing 4.8 yards per carry, so it is a fairly strong matchup over the past 4 weeks. But it's just not a backfield that I've been extremely excited about. If one of the running backs is actually inactive, like if Kevon Latulis actually sits, then I'd be a little bit more interested. Maybe I get too close to the field here. But I think that there's still just a little bit of a threat that third running back is more involved. Like if they start running the ball more rather than just concentrating around those two, I think if the pie gets bigger, it could be Kevon Latulis that takes up the excess that is added in there. So I probably am going to be slightly with or over the field on Kylan James if he comes in at 7%, and a little bit under the field on Jarvion Howard at 22%.
Yeah, no, I think that is very reasonable. Since week 6, Kylan James, 8 red zone carries to Jarvion Howard's 5, and 3 inside the 10 carries to Jarvion Howard's 1. So definitely a clear preference there on rushing stuff with Kylan James. I think another sort of minor note about this backfield, and part of why Jarvion Howard in particular is projecting pretty well, is that while we don't get a lot of backfield routes here, they do make a point of getting design targets to these backs, and Perez is also a bit of a check down merchant. So yeah, Jarvion Howard's target share, despite him only running about 30% of routes each game, is he pushes for like a 0.25 targets per out run, which is like a Jahmyr Gibbs type number, and it's just really because of how the offense works. It's not because he's a spectacular receiver or anything like that. All right, Neil, moving on to the first of, or actually our only game on Saturday. This game does have a showdown slate. It's the Houston Gamblers at the Birmingham Stallions. Houston is a 2.5-point dog. The total here is 44.5. I'm not sure I have much of a take on this line. Do you, Neil?
No, I wouldn't say that I have a strong take on this line. It feels about right, 44.5. I think the Stallions should probably be favored here, especially with the quarterback kind of up in the air in Houston. No, I don't have any great takes here.
Yeah. So speaking of the quarterback situation in Houston, when I wrote my article yesterday, I initially wrote this up and I initially projected it as, oh, hey, I'm excited to get a full game from John Rice Plumlee. I think he's interesting as a rusher. Hunter Dekkers, for those unaware, ended up playing, I believe it was either 2 or 3 drives last week, and then got hurt and could not return to the game. Someone said post game that, they tried to get, I think it was his shoulder, they tried to get him like warmed up again during halftime, and he just couldn't go, which is why Plumlee ended up playing the rest of that contest. Well, Hunter Dekkers isn't on the injury report, Neil, which is extremely strange since he couldn't finish the game. And to the best of my knowledge, there has not been a transaction placing him on IR or anything like that. So I'm left basically projecting a 50-50 split between Dekkers and Plumlee. I've reached out to a few sources in Houston. They say they have no idea who the starting quarterback is going to be. So I don't know. I feel kind of stuck here. I think for the main slate, I'm not really going to play either of these guys. Do you have a take there? I'd imagine you agree.
I agree. Yeah, I'm not playing him on the main slate.
Showdown, though, I mean, it is fairly relevant. Who do we think is gonna get more snaps here? I would lean towards the guy who we know is healthy, which is Rice Plumlee. He's also a pretty exciting rusher. I kind of think there's a variety of ways you could play this for Showdown, Neil, and I'm very curious on your thoughts. You could potentially play both quarterbacks in the same lineup. You could try to avoid both quarterbacks. Do you have a preference? Like, what do you think if you're playing the Showdown slate?
I mean, a starter will be named, so that'll help. Like if Plumlee is named as a starter, I'm actually at that point I might even have interest in Plumlee on the main slate if he's named as the starter, just because 8,200 and with that kind of rushing upside, it's and last week was kind of an exception where we had Jalen Morton score 36 fantasy points. We've had weeks this year where I don't think a quarterback has reached. I could be wrong about this, but I think we've had weeks where no quarterback reached more than like 20 points. So in that case, if we get 14 from Plumlee, even if he's not that great, just because of the rushing. Suddenly that might be good enough at 8,200. So if he's named the starter, I might consider it, but probably not. I still think I probably don't get either of them on the main slate. But certainly on Showdown, if Plumlee is named the starter, he'd be the one I'd be more interested in. But yeah, it's I don't know if I would play them both in the same lineup. I guess you could. You have so few lineups you can play in these Showdown contests.
Right.
My guess is that I would never actually get to it. I usually hand build these, and I don't think that I would do it where I play both of them. That's more of a, like, if I were 150 maxing, I might try weird stuff like that, but I probably would not do it.
Okay.
Playing them both together.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, Neil, I think I did as well, mentioned the rushing upside for Plumlee. This is a guy who returned kicks when he played in the NFL preseason in 2024 and 2025. Only 5 carries this year, but 8.2 yards per attempt. Just sort of like the classic. We get a ton of these guys in spring football where it's like, they're questionable as decision makers, as passers, but man, they're great athletes, and Plumlee absolutely falls into that category. Neil, when it comes to the Houston pass catchers here, I think, particularly for main slate, I really do think this is pretty straightforward. Jalen Marino-Cropper and Lawrence Keys are kind of the only guys we can trust. Keys was at a 94% route share, Marino-Cropper at an 89% route share in week 9. Those were the only Houston pass catchers to earn a route share over 60% in week 9. And I mean, Marino-Cropper's led the team in target share and receiving yards over the last month. Keys has finished second in both categories. They're both reasonably priced. Neil, I'd imagine you're moderately interested in both guys for main slate.
Yeah, it's all going to come down to ownership, but yes, I think both are very much in play. It is like if Plumlee is the quarterback, that's probably worse for them than if they had Dekkers in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got Keys at, he's only 5,100, 22% ownership seems fine. I probably end up under that number just because I'm not playing the quarterback, so I'm usually going to be correlating in some way, and so I probably would guess that I'm underweight on Keys. And then Marino-Cropper, we've got a 15%. That feels a little bit better. I think we've seen a little bit more from Marino-Cropper. He's only a little bit more expensive and coming in at lower ownership, so I guess he would be my preference still over Keys. But yeah, I think both are. These are the 2 playable wide receivers, and I probably get to both of them on the main slate.
Yeah, like that. And then I think, if you're playing Showdown, mixing in a Jontre Kirkland, a Javonte Payton, also a little interesting. Yeah, probably won't get to a ton of that even on Showdown. Neil, backfield here ended up being fairly interesting. Jalen White was a healthy scratch in week 9, and that led to usage really just concentrating around Marcus Yarns and Kirk Merritt. Marcus Major was active. He played 12% of snaps and 14% of routes. He received 0 touches, though. Marcus Yarns led the way with 46% of snaps, 23% of routes, and 57% of backfield weighted opportunity. Ended up finishing with 12 rush attempts and 2 targets. And then Kirk Merritt was out there for 53% of snaps, 34% of routes, leading the way in both of those categories. Finished with just 4 rush attempts, but 3 targets, and 43% of backfield weighted opportunity. Neil, I was the most encouraged by Merritt. I've always thought he's a pretty good player. He's also a fairly big body. He did get their 1 carry inside the 10 last week. And Yarns and Major are both on the injury report. I expect both to play. They were both limited on Wednesday, but I did think that was another interesting note. So we don't necessarily know what the team's going to do with Jalen White. We don't really know. Hopefully they keep 3 active. We don't know who those 3 would be, but I think especially relative to price, Merritt's only 4,500. I probably won't get there on main slate, maybe 1 or 2 lineups in the $20. But for Showdown, I think Merritt is a really strong play. I like him a lot there. What do you say on this backfield?
Yeah, I would even say Merritt is playable on the main slate at 3.5% ownership, 4,500, just because running back has been so gross. I don't think I'll get to a lot just because I do think we have better options this week than we have had a lot of weeks. But I could see myself getting to just a bit of Merritt on the main slate. Just he's shown it to us in the past. He's got a little bit of pop. He's only 4,500. He can be involved in the passing game. I could play a little bit of Merritt. Probably not playing anybody else from this backfield unless we get like 2 of these guys out and we only have 2 active running backs. At that point, I might have more interest. But yeah, as it stands, probably Merritt, the only one that I would even consider playing on the main slate. And I'm not sure if I'll get there. If I do, it'll probably be 1 or 2 lineups.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, if you are playing Showdown, there's so much uncertainty on this Houston backfield that last week we saw like Marcus Yarns come in at 4% ownership on that showdown slate. And, I was very happy with that. And I think we could have a similar situation this week where guys like Merritt and Yarns, assuming they're both active and it's a 3-man backfield, come in at, 10 to 15% ownership. And I think that would be pretty strong there for showdown. Birmingham side of this game, Neil, I mean, it's do or die time for Birmingham. What do you think of DTR in a game that they just really need?
Yeah. DTR, we have kind of limited, like we've talked about, limited quarterback options this week. I think DTR very much in play. It's not a particularly great matchup. Houston, one of those teams that, the defenses look better and better throughout the year. Lately, 6.3 yards per pass attempt allowed, 4 yards per carry. But I do think, DTR is kind of a unique quarterback. So maybe we can get it done even in a tougher matchup. We're going to get kind of an ownership discount somewhat because he has not been as good as we've seen, but we've seen a pretty high ceiling on DTR. Now we're getting him sub 20% at sub $10,000 price tag. Yeah, I think DTR is a great play. And then we also have some pretty strong pass catching options with him. I think Jaden Mickens, pretty strong option every week. Day Hunter is going to look good. Justin Ross, a strong option every week. So yeah, I think this is a spot I'm going to be attacking.
You said Day Hunter. Did you mean?
I did. I did mean Daywood.
So
I meant Daywood Davis.
Okay, yeah. So Daywood Davis, I will say, if he plays, very strong play, a guy that I like a lot. I wrote him up. I am concerned though, Neil, because he didn't participate in Tuesday practice. He also did not participate in Wednesday practice. So I actually removed him from our projections. I'm ready to put him back in if we have to. And I was excited about him. Like I said, I wrote him up. But I think with Daywood Davis potentially out, one that really secures the route shares of Deon Cain and Justin Ross, like those guys are going to be out there on the outside for basically every snap. It also moves Jabri Barber into a range where he's sort of a fringe main slate play. Definitely a really strong showdown play, though. He's only 3,200. He would probably soak up a lot of those secondary slot snaps in Birmingham. And again, this is a team that runs a lot of 10 personnel, a lot of 4 wide receiver stuff. So that secondary slot role is still worth, maybe a 60% route share or so. We might see Marlon Williams rotate in a little bit more. Even if Elijah Cooks is active, he's probably only playing on the outside, and I doubt they'd give him more than a few snaps. So I'm not too worried about him. Yeah, Neil, do you have anything else to add now that I've added the Daywood Davis injury context, which is obviously unfortunate?
Yeah, no, I think that is a good note that Jabari Barber might be playable, but yeah, I think it's still going to be like Jaden Mickens quite a bit. Justin Ross, Deon Cain, like we still have like the clear top end receivers, and then maybe Jabari Barber just for a little bit of salary saving can be included in those lineups. Yeah,
and Justin Ross is a guy that. Obviously at fantasypoints.com, I'm sort of contractually obligated to promote, but he was statistically the best wide receiver in the league in the first 6 weeks of the season. And then over the last 3 weeks, he's averaged 1.8 fantasy points per game. So there's no injury there. There aren't really any playing time concerns. I like Justin Ross quite a bit. It does appear that the field's going to like Justin Ross quite a bit, though, as well. We have him projected for 24% ownership. Jaden Mickens at 23%. Deon Cain is the guy who you're getting the best discount on there, just 7% ownership. So, definitely worth keeping in mind. But those would be the big three I'd want to pair with DTR. When it comes to the backfield, so Anthony McFarland isn't on the injury report. I'm not really sure who they're going to keep active here. That will be interesting to see. I do think they'll only keep 2, though. Last week, for what it's worth, Tyrion Davis-Price did lead the way in weighted opportunity, 56% of weighted opportunity, but only 35% of snaps, 26% of routes. Snoop Connor led the way in terms of playing time at 55% of snaps, 43% of routes. Neil, how are you viewing the backfield this week?
I mean, currently we have TDP at just 3% ownership at 5,900. My guess is it comes in a little bit higher than that after what we saw last week. But yeah, I think he's a very strong play if he does come in at single-digit ownership. I also think Snoop Connor is a strong play, assuming Anthony McFarland does not play. It's really going to be contingent on having only 2 active running backs. If there are only 2 of the 3 active, I'm going to have interest in both of those active running backs. But as of right now, if it's Snoop Connor and Tyrion Davis-Price, from what we've seen recently, I think they're both fairly strong plays at relatively low ownership. We've got Snoop Connor about 12% at 6,700. has not really been getting it done recently for us, despite being in strong matchups. But he's getting enough usage that I think he is very much in play at lower ownership and a reasonable price tag. So yeah, I think both are. TDP would be the preference between the two of them, just because currently we've got him at lower ownership at a lower price tag. But I think both are reasonably strong main slate plays.
Yeah, I think what's kind of holding that TDP ownership back is Lingard. I think Lingard's going to soak up so much running back ownership that people aren't going to want to get to any of these guys who project a little bit worse. And I think, especially at this point in the season, Neil, I think a lot of people just want to sort of take the best running back value they can and then focus on, getting some of these stud wide receivers in their lineup. All right, moving on here to our third game, the first of two Sunday games. This game kicks off at noon on Sunday. It's the Orlando Storm at the DC Defenders. The Storm are favored by 1.5. The total is a slate high 47.5 here. Neil, I think I like the Storm and the points. As we get later in the season, I think these lines have gotten better and better. I don't know that I feel super strongly about that. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. I like the Storm and the points. I also like the under here. I think this is, one of the higher totals out there. We've got Spencer Sanders out there. I don't think that he is, the same caliber of quarterback as Jordan Ta'amu. Jason Bean getting in there maybe makes things a little bit murkier. But I think I'm going to like the under here. I also think, Orlando is, they're going out there to play. Anthony Beck wants to show off his guys, but they don't have a ton of incentive to really push the score. I don't know. I think I could see this one being kind of a slower paced game. So I think the under is my favorite here, but I'm also with you that, the Storm and the points, there should be a bigger spread here. The Storm are just a much better team than the Defenders without Ta'amu.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Some important notes just for this game in general. So as Neil said, Anthony Becht has been adamant all week that the Storm will play their starters. He was asked this post-game in week 9, and he was also asked this midweek, and he said the same thing both times. We're going to play our guys, basically noting that, their opportunity to get snaps in general is very limited. The guys that deserve tape should be getting tape. And I also think this was a very interesting and I think, probably sharp note from him. He was like, NFL scouts will probably only watch the last 2, 3, maybe 4 games of the season. And that's where we're at right now. So we want to get our most important players snaps so that they can get into the NFL. Shannon Harris has not provided any insight into DC's plans this week in regards to how they want to handle rotations. Again, they do have that playoff spot locked up. It's worth noting that the team did rest Jordan Ta'amu in week 10 last year. We also saw Chris Rowland play in a more limited role in week 10 last year. So there is the possibility we get some weird rotations from DC. It's really hard to bake this into projections. Neil, let's actually start with the DC side here since I'm talking about them. Spencer Sanders played every snap last week, but it does look like Jason Bean could play a bit here. Shannon Harris said that Jason Bean's looking more comfortable. That's the thing we wanted to see. His reps have increased. Both of those guys, Spencer and Jason, are taking meaningful reps. We'll see how it plays out the rest of the week. I think Spencer Sanders is fine. Maybe DC could even win a championship with him, but Bean is a better or a more similar quarterback, I should say, to Jordan Ta'amu. And I think if you really want the downfield passing element of this offense to thrive, which it generally has with Ta'amu, Bean is going to be, the guy that you want under center. So it would make sense for them to play. For them to play Bean. I have about a 70-30 split projected right now between Spencer Sanders and Jason Bean. What do you think about that? I'd imagine you're not getting to either on the main slate, but there is a 2-game slate here. So thoughts?
Yeah, correct that I'm not getting either on the main side unless Bean is named the starter. If Bean is named the starter, that would change things quite a bit. I don't know how likely that is. Probably pretty unlikely at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, not interested on the main slate in either of them. On the 2-gamer, so let's see who do we have on the 2? We've got Orlando, DC, and then Louisville
and Columbus. Yeah,
and Columbus. Yeah, I mean, I think we have playable quarterbacks across the board outside of the Defenders. So it's, I think I'd like it better if we had one more murky quarterback situation on the Sunday only slate. But yeah, I still think again it would be if Bean is named the starter, I would have interest. If it is Spencer Sanders as a starter, I don't have a ton of interest there. It would have to be pretty low ownership on the 2-gamer. If he comes in at 5% and I have higher than that, I would feel pretty good about it. But I think generally it's going to be, the weakest quarterback spot on that slate.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That is going to make it hard, though, like this sort of general murkiness, one with Spencer Sanders playing. I mean, like I said, he's limited as a passer. That will move the team more towards the run. But also, the potential here that maybe Cornell Powell doesn't get his full allotment of snaps. Maybe Ty Scott doesn't quite get his full allotment of snaps. We're not really sure. That makes it hard for any of these guys to come out great in projections. I actually ended up writing Braylon Sanders up, just saying, like, I think if anyone benefits from DC potentially resting, at least among the skill position guys, the clearest winner would be Braylon Sanders, where, I think their most important skill players, sort of excluding if we're just talking wide receivers, are, pretty clearly Ty Scott and Cornell Powell. And Braylon Sanders is the guy who, takes those routes when those guys end up missing. You would also see a little bit of Javon Antonio work in there. Antonio's another guy that I want to keep an eye on. If he ends up a healthy scratch for this game, that would point to the team not really rotating Powell and Scott off the field as much, I would assume. So that's another important note. But yeah, Neil, anything to add on these pass catchers? Because this is kind of a tricky spot for the main slate.
Yeah, no, I think Braylon Sanders is a great call. Do you think either of these, like, are there any tight ends that are playable here? Because that's been like a thing that DC has done, is they've made their tight ends relevant at times this year, and maybe that's something that, if they're not feeling great about the quarterback play, usually when they've done it, it's been like really short, like wheel routes, I think. So it's, I think maybe we could see them try something like that, where it's just like you're not relying on your quarterback throwing it far down the field. That's something they could try to do. So, but is anybody out? Are we kind of?
So Briley Moore is not listed on DC's initial injury report here. They had Wednesday participation, only 2 players up, and none of them were skill guys. So Briley Moore's missed the last 3 weeks with a personal issue. Shannon Harris said he was just dealing with a family thing. If he was back, I don't think I'd get there on main slate. He's only 3,800, but for the 2-gamer, I think Briley Moore would be very, very interesting. If he ends up sitting again, I've got an okay projection on Mason Fairchild, about 3.5 points.
Yeah.
He's 3,500, so that's that's nothing spectacular. Neil, anything else to add before we talk backfield?
No, I like the Braylon Sanders call, but yeah, nothing too exciting here.
Okay, yeah. Backfield here, it is, still pretty gross. 3-man committee. We saw Deion Jackson at 33% of snaps, Savion Valladay at 45%, Abram Smith at 20% last week. Deion Jackson led the way in weighted opportunity, but it was only 41%. I don't know, Neil. I think I like Valladay the most for the 2-game slate. I'm not playing either of these guys, though, on the main. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. I'm not enthusiastically playing anybody from this. I'm probably not getting there on the main slate.
Yep. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Moving it over to the Storm here. Neil, I think, one, I want to say, I believe Anthony Becht. Anthony Becht has always given very honest coach speak. So I do believe him when he says, we're going to play our starters. We're going to play our guys. We want to show everybody off. What do you think of Jack Plummer, though? He's going to be right there as the highest owned quarterback of the slate. And he's also been tearing it up. He's averaged 22 DraftKings fantasy points per game over the last 4 games. He had that incredible 70-yard touchdown run a couple weeks ago. He's got a very concentrated group of receivers, so he's easy to stack. All his receivers are also very good. What do you think of Plummer here?
Yeah, as a lifelong Orlando Storm fan, it's been great to see Jack Plummer just being, the best quarterback in the league all season, as expected, of course, as we all thought he would be. It really depends on. I wouldn't. So we've got him projected at 26% ownership. My guess is that I would come in a little bit under that number, just because I do think some of these other quarterbacks are about as interesting, and I could see them, kind of slowing the game down a little bit. I think he's clearly one of the stronger options. He's just been so good from a fantasy perspective, especially showing those wheels a couple weeks ago. And we do, it's very, very straightforward who your parent. There's 3 wide receivers that you want to stack up with Jack Plummer, and the more you play him, the more different, combos of 2 you can do there. So yeah, I think Jack Plummer is a strong play. I guess my bigger concern is that, so we've got him at 26%. My bigger concern is that he's going to come in at 35%. Probably not. It's probably, I guess, probably not, because now we've got Jalen Morton. Everybody's gonna be, wanting to play Jalen Morton instead. So maybe that's not as big of a worry as I'm making it out to be. At 26%, I think he's fine. He's probably a little bit over-owned at 26%. I think he can have a good game and still put up 18 fantasy points and see some of these other quarterbacks beat him. And if I'm being honest, I'm still not convinced that he is like as good as he has shown so far this season. A good coach. He has played well. So maybe it's real. Maybe he's just better than we realized. But I probably come in underweight on 26%, just given that we do have a few quarterback options that I do feel pretty good about.
Yeah, I think Colin Thompson, the Storm offensive coordinator, has done a really, really good job this year, and I also think these wide receivers have helped Plummer out a decent bit. Speaking of these wide receivers, Neil, I think they're all strong plays, and that's all reflected in our projected ownership. We've got Roland at 32%, Badger at 32%, KJ Hamler at 23%. I sort of laid out a bull case for Badger last week, and this is a rematch. DC just plays a lot of press coverage. You get a lot of single high, and Badger is sort of that guy on the outside who pretty easily leads the team in deep targets this year. Hamler, of course, interesting. I did want to note, though, that, we saw, I believe it was in week 7, the team got a little weird with Chris Rowland, where they only gave him 37% of routes. And Anthony Beck noted, I think it was to me in the midweek media availability, he was like, oh, yeah, Chris Rowland, he returns kicks for us. It's hard for him to be out there on first down after he returns a kick for 50 or 60 yards. So I think if anyone has playing time risk, and I think we're going to see the normal workload for these guys, but if you are concerned about playing time for any of these guys, I think Roland would be the guy that they probably end up taking off the field the most. Anything to add there on the pass catchers, Neil, before talk backfield?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of love all three of these pass catchers. Roland, you got the great slot matchup, and then now we have KJ Hamler is coming in at the lowest ownership of the three, and I still think, as you've said several times, I think he's a really talented receiver, and now we're getting him at a lower price tag and lower ownership after the dud last week. I don't have any really great takes, because Roland now up over 30% ownership becomes I think he's a really strong play, but I think that ownership kind of reflects how strong of a play he is. Badger similarly. With KJ Hamler, again, the only one that we get any kind of ownership discount on. I like them all. I'm going to be playing them all largely in stacks, but I'll have some as one-offs as well. I think these three are three of the stronger wide receiver plays on the slate. It's a strong spot.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Backfield, I mean, Neil, this just happens over and over again. Jashaun Corbin was 73% of backfield weighted opportunities, 65% of snaps, 45% of routes, 12.3 weighted opportunities, and he finishes with 6.5 DraftKings points. Neil, do you have Corbin fatigue? Are you willing to go back here, or are we just going to have the same thing every week where he gets around, he should score around 15 fantasy points and he ends up scoring 8 every time?
I have so much Corbin fatigue. I just don't ever want to see the name ever again. It's multiple years now. He just will not do what I want him to do on any slate. Yeah. I think I'll be underweight. I think this is a spot where I'm finally just going to say, screw it. I'm going to be underweight here. So you guys should play him. He's going to put up 30 fantasy points because I'm not playing him this week. I just think we have so many strong running back options, and he has just been so underwhelming. Anthony Beck at one point, kind of, alluded to the possibility that they're going to make a switch and maybe start playing somebody else more, and then they didn't really do that. So it's maybe this is the week they finally do that, especially with nothing really on the line. I don't think, with how bad Corbin has done, does he have a real shot at making an NFL roster? I don't think he has a real shot at getting back. I think he might have made one last year after he was.
So he was with New England last year, and then he ended up getting hurt on the practice squad, because I know they dealt with a handful of running back injuries, and he never ended up getting called up to the active roster because he was hurt for most of October, November, if I remember correctly. I want to say that I'm with you, but hearing that you're done with Corbin is you got to be on. Maybe I can reverse engineer this and take, because Neil's obviously going to get cooked by the 35-point Jashaun Corbin game. Maybe I can take advantage of this. That's true. Corbin, though, 8K, he's expensive. I have him projected for 23% ownership. I actually might bump that down. I wouldn't be surprised if he came in at 15, something like that. Yeah. Even then it's just hard to argue for. We really haven't seen many explosives from this backfield at all. It doesn't really matter who's back there, whether it's Corbin, Trey Stewart, Elijah Dotson. Just not many big plays. This whole offense is the passing game, and they've been really efficient and really good at that. But the rushing game's just kind of it's just kind of there, and that's really all you can say about it.
I do want to say, like, I think you're right to bump down the ownership. I do think we're going to see lower ownership on Jashaun Corbin here because there are so many other, like, this is a relatively strong week as far as running back options go. I think we've got enough pretty interesting running back plays, and everybody has fatigue, Jashaun Corbin fatigue. And if he ends up at this is maybe outlandish, but he could end up at 8%. Like, I wouldn't be that shocked to see him end up at 8% ownership, at which point I'm going to feel real stupid for not having a ton of him. So
until he finishes with 7 DraftKings points.
Yeah, I mean, true, but
you're right. There have been a couple weeks this year where we've had surprisingly low Corbin ownership, and yeah, I mean, even I think week 5, week 6, there was a week where he ended up at 7-8%. So that is possible. It's just tough pill to swallow this week when we've got the elite value of Lorenzo, Lingard, and Corbin's a little expensive. Okay, moving on to the final game of the slate. I haven't decided yet. I might go to this one. The Louisville Kings at the Columbus Aviators, all the way up in Columbus, Ohio. The Kings are favored by 2.5 points. The total here is 46.5. That feels about right to me, Neil. What do you think of that game line?
Yeah, I think that feels about right to me. Also, I'm trying to think, what do I think of Jalen? I don't know what to make of Jalen Morton at this point, because I didn't think he was going to be very good, and then he just went completely off
last week. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I just wouldn't bet it.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. Important note for this game, and I do think this is probably the most important sort of motivation note of the slate. Louisville will make the playoff with a Birmingham loss, a DC loss, or a win. And because they play in the last game, we're kind of unsure about the motivations for them if DC or Birmingham loses before this game kicks off. I noted in my article, I'll update with any information that I get. I haven't heard of a midweek media availability for the Kings yet so far. So I'll reach out to whatever sources I have. I think, some of the other people covering the league have been very good about asking coaches, what their motivations are. Are they going to play starters in these games? So if I see anything from Chris Redman on that, I will obviously update everything in Discord. I'll let people know. But yeah, Neil, we just don't really know how Louisville would handle this if they had the playoffs clinched when they head into this game. Chandler Rogers, though, was a guy that I played 0 of last week, and I ended up regretting that immensely, particularly on the 2-game slate, Neil. Not a guy who looks like he's going to draw much ownership this week, though, which certainly makes me interested. We only have him projected for about 7%. Maybe that'll come up a bit, but I do think ownership's really going to concentrate on some of those top guys that we've already discussed. What do you think of Rogers here?
Yeah, I think Rogers has been good enough that we can play him any given week. We have let me see the ownership on Rogers, because that's obviously going to be pretty important into how much I want to play here. So we have Chandler Rogers at under 7% ownership. I think he's a fairly strong play at 9,400. Now this has been more of a run funnel defense in recent weeks, but I guess less so than it had been in the middle of the season. The yards per carry allowed has come down a little bit. They're really not allowing a ton through the air, though. 5.2 yards per pass attempt. It's not a great spot, but Chandler Rogers, I think, has shown enough, and we have some strong pass catching options to pair him with. So I think he is playable on the main slate. I think I probably come in over 6.5%, but he not a ton over. He'll be in 3 of my lineups, which would put me overweight to what the field is doing, but not in any kind of meaningful way. In part because we as we have alluded to, although we have a few murky situations, so there's some complete stay away quarterbacks, we do actually have, I think, fairly strong quarterbacks among the remaining teams. There's a lot of sort of interesting spots. So I think I'm actually going to be fairly spread out to the teams that have clear starters. So outside of DC and Houston, I think are the 2 that I'm probably just not playing. Outside of those, I think I'm actually going to be fairly spread out at quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. If you are playing Chandler Rogers, or honestly, even if you're not, I think it's pretty clear at this point. Tarik Black is the top wide receiver play over in Louisville. Only 7,500 still. 29% target share, 54 receiving yards per game, and 15.4 receiving fantasy points per game over his last 3 games. I think it's kind of interesting to note 15.4 receiving fantasy points per game would lead all wide receivers over the full season. I think he's a great play. I also have no problem, though, pivoting to a guy like Isaiah Winstead or Lucky Jackson if I want to save on ownership. Neil, I was pretty excited when I did this initial run of ownership. Winstead's only at 3%, Lucky Jackson at 1%. I wouldn't be shocked if I ended up bumping those guys up in the next, 24 hours. But, getting either player at single digits feels pretty good here. And even Tarik Black at, we've got 16% right now. All those ownership numbers feel pretty good on these Louisville wide receivers. They're all talented players.
Yeah, we get, the cheap quarterback who's not getting a ton of ownership, pass catcher's not getting a ton of ownership. I think all of them, like they're talented enough to be the stack that you want. I was actually with you. I was thinking about it after the fact. I'm pretty sure I swapped some of my like better lineups from Chandler Rogers stacks to Luis Perez stacks, and that might have cost me some big money last week because Chandler Rogers just kind of balled out. And I think that this is just a team that has kind of a wide range of outcomes, because I don't think that Chandler Rogers is like a sure thing, but I think he has shown the ability to spike, and these receivers will come along with him. And I think they're really talented receivers. So I think I would be mixing and matching the double stacks, I think, typically with Chandler Rogers.
Yeah, I like that. You were making me flashback to when I looked at my lineups on the 2-game slate, having 0 Chandler Rogers, and that was not great. That was not the best feeling I've ever had. This backfield, Neil, it feels gross. Like you watch James Robinson play and you think that guy's really slow. But he's earning the usage. 20 weighted opportunities last week, 57% of snaps, 50% of routes, ended up finishing with 65% of backfield weighted opportunity. Now, Louisville did run 72 plays, so that number is a tad inflated. But, it's pretty encouraging to me that J-Rob is earning this good of usage. And I think people who are looking to pay up at running back may end up preferring him to a player like Jashaun Corbin. What do you think of James Robinson here? Because as we've noted sort of all year, Columbus is a very strong rushing matchup and generally much more of a run funnel than a pass funnel.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really strong spot to attack as well. James Robinson, Ian Wheeler, I think also like he's had multiple spike weeks now on the season. He'll just get those goal line carries. If he can convert them, he can put up a big score. So yeah, I think I like James Robinson quite a bit. I think one of my favorite running back plays on the slate against this Columbus defense. It has been a little bit better, I guess, in recent weeks. They're allowing 4.5 yards per carry. So I think you said this in your article, but they've kind of come back to like league average in terms of a run defense. But I think just the way that Louisville has kind of leaned on these running backs at times, I think fairly strong plays here. Now, the downside to both James Robinson and Ian Wheeler is the prices come up quite a bit. So, Ian Wheeler, a little bit of a tougher pill to swallow at his current price tag than when he was like a $5,000 running back. But I think still like in play on the main slate, maybe more of a late swap option, but James Robinson, certainly one of the stronger plays on the slate. 23% ownership seems totally fine at 7,700. Ian Wheeler, we've got him at 2% ownership. I think he's actually going to be a really strong late swap option if you're playing from behind. We've seen him put up, 19, 20 fantasy points multiple times. And he's 6,500 at 2% ownership. Yeah, I think more of a late swap option than a player I'm going to have a lot going into the slate.
Yeah, 40% of inside the 5 carries too for Ian Wheeler over the last month for Louisville. So he's got some touchdown equity on top of, he's had some breakaway runs there too. So yeah, I do think that's a good call on the late swap for Ian Wheeler. Moving over to the Columbus side, Neil, Jalen Morton, my initial projection for Jalen Morton was like 24.5 DraftKings points. I've walked that back. He's still pretty clearly our highest projected quarterback of the slate, both in terms of raw projection and value. I just loved what I saw last week out of Jalen Morton. Broke the slate, 213 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 96 rushing yards, and a rushing score. Finished just 4 yards away from the bonus and still scored 36.1 DraftKings points. Neil, I said in my article, and even admitted this was probably too favorable of a comparison, it felt like we airdropped 2015 Cam Newton onto a UFL field. Realistically, I think the better comp here is he's kind of a slower, more powerful Adrian Martinez. But man, Jalen Morton was fantastic. And my struggle with this projection, and I honestly, I feel pretty good about the number that we have right now, but it's just like I can't really get him any lower if he's going to scramble on 20% of his dropbacks and steal, 25 or 30% of designed rushes. That's such an incredible rushing workload that it almost doesn't matter what I do to his passing efficiency. So, where are you at on Jalen Morton here? And then also, I'm curious on your thoughts. What are you going to do with stacking him? Because last week we saw the naked Jalen Morton teams were actually the best off. Some teams that played Chisholm did okay, but I'm curious what your views are on Morton.
I'm glad that you recognize that comparing him to an NFL MVP might be a little bit much for this UFL quarterback. That you might be just like getting ahead of yourself slightly, just very slightly.
If I ever bust out these NFL comparisons, it's always like you gotta dumb it down to the UFL level. When I call Justin Hall the Antonio Brown of the UFL, I don't mean that he's anywhere close to Antonio Brown, the NFL player. I mean that he's that version of Antonio Brown in spring football.
Okay.
Does that at least make sense?
I understand what you're saying. Okay. I think Jalen Morton a strong. He's the one. So the reason that I step back from maybe we won't see outsized ownership on Jack Plummer because Jalen Morton was so good last week that I could see him being the one that ends up being 45% owned, high stakes 60% owned kind of player. I don't think that'll happen, but I think people are going to be clamoring to play Jalen Morton this week, and it's really as always it's so much dependent on like how is ownership actually going to shake out. And unfortunately I struggle sometimes with like I don't try to do ownership projections thankfully, because I think that it's really tough to do. And here we've got Jalen Morton at 21% projected ownership. I would be shocked if Jalen Morton doesn't come in higher than that pretty significantly, just based on we saw him play the one game. He's only 9,100. Like you said, people love the rushing upside, and this being the last game of the slate, I think that does factor in. People are going to want to play the quarterback on the last game of the slate. Gives you maximum swappability. It's more fun to be able to cheer for, still have that out in the final game of the slate. So I think Jalen Morton probably comes in higher than we're projected. It's just a matter of how much higher. And if he comes in at 35% ownership, I would definitely want to be under the field. If he comes in at 25% ownership, I think that's probably fair with Jalen Morton. He's a great play. I think my favorite stacking partner would be Tay Martin. Just this being kind of a slot funnel matchup, Tay Martin being the primary slot receiver on this team and just the best receiver in general. So didn't show us much last week. We haven't really seen that pairing hit in the way we'd like, but I think that could happen. So I think Tay Martin is strong. Or as you said, I actually think Aesop Winston at the Stone Min becomes kind of interesting, just because you don't need that much from him for that 3,000 to be worth it. I think those would be my favorite stacking partners with Jalen Morton.
Yeah, I didn't catch it live. At first I thought Antoine Wells got benched, but Antoine Wells is dealing with a quad injury. He is, let me pull up the practice report here. He did not practice on Wednesday, so we definitely want to keep an eye on him. We also want to keep an eye on Jalen Moore, who's dealing with a foot issue. He also did not practice on Wednesday. Assuming both of those guys missed, though, Aesop Winston, he was out there for 83% of routes, also earned a 21% target share in week 9. He's the minimum price. I mean, if we're getting a full-time player at the minimum price tag at this point in the year, he's just going to be an awesome value. Still waiting for injury stuff to unfold. I'm not exactly sure where ownership is going to fall on Winston. If I had to guess, assuming he is in that full-time role and those players that I discussed previously end up being out, maybe in that 20-25% range, somewhere in there. But yeah, what a great salary saver he would be if Antoine Wells and Jalen Moore end up being out here for Columbus. Let's see here. Neil, the backfield is what we need to discuss next. Obviously, John Lovett with a monster performance in week 9. Scored 20.1 DraftKings points. If you were tilting it, you had good reason to. Only 6.2 weighted opportunities, so massively exceeded his expectations. Quandre White actually led the backfield in usage with 37% of backfield weighted opportunity. Toa Taua not far behind at 30%. Lovett finished with 33%. Neil, I think I like Zaquandre White here the most. He's led the backfield in snaps in back-to-back weeks. It's still a 3-man committee. It's tough to predict, but I think White has, the best potential to sort of score on like a breakaway run. He's earning some of the goal line stuff. He seems to be the preferred receiving back, even though, that's a little thin. Of course, Lovett, scored twice on receptions last week. Lovett, I was tilting this in our Discord, but Lovett was one of the worst running backs in the history of the UFL by yards per target, and then just absolutely nuked on receiving in week 9. Just one of those spring football things, Neil. But what do you think of the backfield here?
I'm not gonna play them on the main slate. I would say they're like late swap options. Maybe the 2-game slate. You could go into the slate with some of Zaquandre White, but yeah, I think this is a stay away backfield for me. Just we have so many strong running back options that right. I'd rather play the Louisville running backs even on the 2-game slate. So yeah, I won't have much even on the 2-gamer. Don't think I get here at all on the main slate.
Okay, yeah, I like that as a late swap call. Neil, anything to add on this slate before we wrap it up?
No, I think we have covered it fairly well. It's been a fun regular season. Of course, we'll continue in the playoffs as well doing this show. But I think nothing left to say. I think we got one last shot, Jake, at winning big money, making money on this UFL season. So let's take advantage.
Yeah, let's do it. Very excited for the 3-3-3 this week. I'm sure you guys will see me in there. Please don't dupe me. You probably wouldn't want to play the same lineups as me anyway. But should be a lot of fun. Went a little long today, Neil, but there was a lot to discuss. So we really appreciate everybody for tuning in to the Week 10 edition of the Fantasy Points UFL Breakdown, and we will see you all at the top of the leaderboards. This is